What's up, Slutgangistanis? So I was originally going to do a video or a Twitter inspection about Ron DeSantis tonight. You know, in that series, I'm covering every candidate's Twitter in order of when they announce their campaign, and DeSantis is next. But I didn't have time for that because I'm on a huge road trip right now, so I figured I would do something more, casual. I wanted to talk about an article that was written by Utah Senator and 2012 GOP presidential nominee Mitt Romney. For those of you that don't know, Mitt Romney is the last Republican presidential nominee not named Donald Trump until 2028. And he doesn't like Donald Trump. He gave a big speech opposing Trump in March 2016 once it started to become clear that Trump was going to get the nomination. And now he's back in politics as a senator from Utah, but he's still very anti-Trump, having been the only Republican senator who voted to convict Trump in both of his impeachment trials. So he's trying to stop Trump from getting the nomination in 2024, which, let's face it, is inevitable. It's going to happen, and it's been clear that that's been the case since 2020. And I have a lot of opinions on this article. It's titled, "Donors Don't Fund a Trump Plurality." And the whole spiel is that for a multitude of reasons, candidates won't drop out early enough, and Trump will win with a plurality. There's an issue in the headline, which is that 50% ain't a plurality. You know, you look at polls right now, and in most of them, Trump is like 51, 52% of the Republican primary electorate. That's a majority. You know, I've heard this not just from Mitt Romney, but from like New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu, for example. He wrote in his own op-ed, we can't hand the Republican nomination to a candidate that gets only 35% of the vote. That's like the flawed assumption here, that Trump is gonna get like 35, 40% of the vote and win the nomination. Let's face it, Trump's already under 2 indictments, probably gonna be under a 3rd soon. At that point, it doesn't matter. It's already become clear that no matter how many indictments or how many, scandals he has, his voters aren't going anywhere, After the 2020 election, his support within the party went from about 90% to 55%, and it's been that way ever since. It's not changing. So let's look at the first paragraph. The second sentence is already incorrect. That is possible for any of them to win the nomination if the field narrows to a 2-person race before Mr. Trump has the nomination sewn up. I don't know why we're in this mentality. Even if it was a 2-person race, it's highly unlikely that anybody besides Trump would get the nomination. And I say that because even if I'm being generous and Trump is only getting 47, 48% of the vote in the primary and every other candidate drops out except one, they would have to win every voter for every candidate that just dropped out. That's assuming that none of them would defect to Donald Trump. The other issue is ballot deadlines. And I'll get to that more in a second. Mitt Romney basically says that donors are gonna have to get candidates to do something they didn't in 2016, which is getting them to agree to withdraw if their path to the nomination is closed. First of all, their paths are already closed. Trump is winning the nomination. Like, if candidates would get out of the race when their paths were closed, they wouldn't have gotten in the first place because there is no path to the nomination. Maybe in 2028, Trump will probably run again, but I think maybe the party will be done with him by that point, and maybe there's a chance there. But 2024, there's no chance for any other candidate, so that's already a flawed assumption. But anyway, Romney proposes Monday, February 26th as this target date for candidates to drop out if they have no path to the nomination. The problem with that is it's way too late. Now, I personally think that Trump will win every primary except the one in Mitt Romney's home state of Utah because they just don't really like him. There are 4 early primaries: Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada. And even if candidates drop out after those 4, the majority of them will still be in the race for them, and they'll split the anti-Trump vote. So by and large, it is extremely likely that Trump wins all 4 of those primaries, and it is unheard of for a candidate to win the nomination after not winning any of them. It's called momentum, right? And oftentimes, the candidate that wins Iowa, which is the first nominating contest, doesn't win the nomination, like Ted Cruz or Pete Buttigieg. But that's different than a candidate winning all 4 of those early primaries and then losing the nomination, which doesn't happen. Because we saw the momentum happen with Biden. He didn't even win Iowa or New Hampshire. He won South Carolina, and that was seemingly like the moment the tide changed for him. And then he won the nomination. He pretty much coasted to it at that point. So Trump wins South Carolina and then the other 3. He's already got the nomination. Like, it's highly unlikely that Super Tuesday, which is 8 days after February 26th, is gonna have a huge effect whether or not other candidates drop out. Because the momentum is already gonna be on Trump's side. A lot of undecided voters would break to him by that point. The second problem, as I alluded to earlier, is ballot issues. Dropping out 8 days or 15 days before a primary is not gonna remove a candidate from the ballot in most states. And Super Tuesday, for those of you that don't know, is when the most primaries are. That's March 5th. And there's like 15, 16 primaries that are gonna be that day. The nomination will probably be decided after that. And we've seen seen this happen before in smaller contests, like candidates who dropped out but remained on the ballot. This happened in Arizona in 2022, both in the primary and the general election. In the governor's race, by June, in my opinion earlier, but by June it had become clear that the odds-on favorite to win the Republican nomination was Kari Lake, who is just a historically bad candidate, very pro-Trump, like always talks about the stolen 2020 election and whatnot. Well, there were two viable candidates that weren't Kari Lake. One of them was former US Representative Matt Salmon. He dropped out of the race exactly 5 weeks in advance, not 8 days, 35 days. But his name remained on the ballot and he got 3.69% of the vote, which wasn't insignificant. In fact, it was about 0.1% of the vote short if all those votes had gone to Kari Lake's other main opponent that would have won her the nomination. But that's just one guy. Imagine what happens if, let's say, Chris Christie, Tim Scott, Nikki Haley, Mike Pence, they all drop out on February 26th, but they all remain on the ballot on Super Tuesday and they all get 2 or 3% of the vote. And that's being nice. They probably get more. To be conservative, that's 12% of the vote that withdrawn candidates would get. So even if it diminishes their support, it wouldn't just be suddenly after February 26th, Trump versus DeSantis or Trump versus somebody else. There would still be other people on the ballot to block that from happening and they would still get some votes. Another part of the article says there are incentives for no-hope candidates to overstay their prospects. And Romney knows this, but that's exactly why this February 26th thing will not happen. Because the thing about 2024 in the Republican primary is every candidate is a no-hope candidate. I talked about this with my friend recently. You know, there are motivations for every single other candidate. It's obvious Trump is going to pick a woman for VP, which is what I think Nikki Haley is going for. I think candidates like Vivek Ramaswamy and Tim Scott are running for 2028, trying to shore up their name recognition and donor favorability so that they have an easier path, you know, an easier launch pad when they run in 4 years. There's candidates who genuinely have nothing to lose but know they're not going to win, like Chris Christie. And then there's candidates who are probably just angling for a higher office that's not the presidency, like Francis Suarez, who's the mayor of Miami. There is incentives for every single candidate besides being president because I believe deep down that they all know they're not going to win. Then he talks about how this has happened in the past, but he admits in this paragraph that it did not work. Like candidates dropped out and consolidated behind an alternative to try and stop Richard Nixon and it didn't work. And that's also been seen before in smaller contests. The 2022 Pennsylvania governor's race is a similar story. There were a lot of candidates, but the main two were crazy Trump-endorsed far-right state senator Doug Mastriano and then the more moderate former US Representative Lou Barletta. Well, it became obvious that Mastriano was going to win the nomination. And suddenly, 7 to 10 days before the primary, which is exactly Mitt Romney's timeline, 4 or 5 of them dropped out and endorsed Barletta in a last-ditch attempt to stop Mastriano. Mastriano still won the nomination by 24 points. And of the ones that remained on the ballot, they still got 6% of the vote. And obviously that wouldn't have changed the result, but I'm saying like a week or two before is just way too late. If you really wanted to have a target date, then make it right after Iowa, because the Iowa caucus is 6 weeks before February 26th. And you know, you can't make it before that because candidates won't listen to polls. There's candidates like Doug Burgum who are not going to win the nomination, but they have infinite money, they're going to spend it, and they're going to see how well they can do in one contest. They're not going to drop out before even competing. But you know, if you look at Iowa, a candidate is not going to win 3% of the vote or 5% of the vote and then win the nomination. Like that would just be exceedingly rare, especially in a primary where there's a clear and obvious presumptive nominee. So you know, if you're going to push for a date for candidates to drop out, make it January 17th, 2 days after Iowa. Because unless somebody comes out of nowhere like Tim Scott and gets like 13%, you know, they're not viable. It's going to be real obvious after Iowa who the real competitors are and who won't be, and that's going to be Donald Trump and maybe someone else. It's all fun and games though. Videos like this, you know, candidates running for president, it's all just for fun. Trump's going to be the nominee. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below though.